as a broken vessel. Oh, we lift you up, Jesus. We magnify your name. Your word says that you desire to abide in the praises of your people. So we lift you up, Jesus. We lift you up tonight, Jesus. Oh, as we offer up this praise. Sing it again. Sing, welcome into this place. Oh, welcome into this broken vessel. You desire to abide in the praises of your people. So we lift our hands as we lift our hearts. Sing, we lift. Oh, as we lift our hearts. So we lift our hands as we lift our hearts, as we offer up this praise unto your name. Hallelujah, Jesus. You are worthy, mighty God.
You guys can be seated. Man, what a cool song. Because whenever you're thinking, where's God at, it has the key. He desires to abide in your praises. You know, and part of raising your hand and lifting up your heart is there's vulnerability within that. You know, to be able to lift your hands up, it's a form of surrender. And to be able to lift up your heart, that's typically the one thing that we want to have concealed. You know, people can't see the intentions of your heart, but when you say, God, here's my heart, that's when he's going to be able to come down and change. So that vulnerability is just huge. So, welcome to Saved and Sober. My name is Sam, and this is the OG group. This meeting has been established by Christians who have recovered from mental torment, addiction, and alcoholism. Saved and Sober exists to follow our core beliefs, which are, we believe that there is one God, and his name is Jesus. The only way to truly stay sober once being saved is to work a program of recovery and live a life based on biblical principles on a daily basis, carrying the message of redemptive salvation of Jesus Christ to others. 3, our desire is that Saved and Sober is a spirit-led ministry. Is there anybody that's their first time? No? All right. Well, we're glad you guys were able to come. I know rain is not always the most fun, ideal situation, but you guys prioritizing sobriety and the house of God, God's going to honor that. So love you guys, and here's our speaker, Dr. Wolf.
All right. Thanks, Sam. Appreciate it. Okay, everybody. We got a nice, cozy crew tonight, so I'm excited. Tonight, we're going to talk about responsibility, which is a key principle connected to Step 9. Which involves making amends. And so I know Jake talked last week about Step 9 and making amends. So now we're going to dive in this week more about the responsibility that we have to show in Step 9 when approaching our amends. So I know we have a number of folks in the room that we haven't worked the steps, aren't necessarily recovering from an addiction or something like that. So when you're looking at this isn't Step 10, which is daily kind of going through and making amends and taking an inventory. But I want you to consider how this might apply to you. So how taking responsibility in your actions in your life applies to you. Because it does. It applies to each one of us, regardless of our situation, regardless if we're addicted or not. So I just encourage you, no matter what angle you're approaching this from, what position you're sitting here with, to look at it from what you can get out of it and how you can increase your responsibility as you encounter things that happen to you in life. So when approaching our amends, we must take responsibility for our past actions. We can't just let them hang out there. I know we wish that all the damage that we've done, that we could just leave it there and we could bury it and we wouldn't have to address it. That everyone would conveniently forget about it. That'd be nice. But it doesn't work like that. It's part of the process. And I know that for a lot of people, they think that doing their inventory, their moral inventory, is hard. But I really think that this step in approaching amends can be just as hard, if not harder. It's really where, the rubber meets the road, so to speak, and that you have to really put things into action and start involving other people beyond your sponsor and God in this, right? So that can be kind of scary. So there can be some fear in this. I know for me, I actually went through the 12 steps a few times at a few different points in my life, and it was scary. And I think there's the first time I did it, there was a few. I certainly had less amends to make the first time I went through it. I gathered some more along the way the next time, but it was there was certainly some that I avoided, that I wasn't willing to take responsibility for. And ultimately, did that lead to me going back to drinking and relapsing? It may have, because I really wasn't willing to take that ownership and that responsibility. I was pretty stuck in a selfish place, feeling like I was the victim. And there was certain areas where I was able to see my part, but it was hard for me at that first run that I had with this. And so that is a really important part in this, is to really admit when you are, to kind of take the blinders off, so to speak, and recognize that you're not necessarily the victim here, that you have some responsibility in the actions that you've taken. So our process in taking responsibility and pursuing our amends with people needs to be intentional, prayerful, and it needs to be well thought out. We can't, and I know last week when Jake was saying and reading out of the big book, it does say that we shouldn't delay it. However, we shouldn't just rush through it just to get it done and check the box. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. I feel like I had to really caution myself. There was some amends that I did just want to rush out and just do without being prayerful, without being intentional. And that's never a good idea. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So we can't just crash through this in a selfish way like we did our addiction, saying, well, I'm just going to get what I want. I want to get this done for me, and I want to check the box and say, yes, I did it. And then that person receiving it, it's like, what? Like, they're not ready. The timing's not right. God's saying no, but you're not listening to any of it. And you'll find that it won't work like that for you. You won't find much success. And then you might as well have not done it at all. So we'll talk about what it means to be intentional and prayerful in it. So in the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, which is the smaller book that we refer to, we sometimes call it the 12 and 12, on page 83, if you want to read it, it says that good judgment, a careful sense of timing, courage, and prudence, these are all qualities we shall need when we take step 9. And this is at the very beginning of the step. And I was reading that, and so that's what we're going to talk about, is breaking down these different pieces. Good judgment, a careful sense of timing, courage, and prudence. And those are all of the pieces that we need to be considering as we approach this step. And then I want to also reference in the Bible in Galatians 6:5, it says, for every man shall bear his own burden. So that's us taking responsibility for what we've done. We must bear our own burden. So first we're going to start with admitting responsibility. So when we admit responsibility over what we've done, we move from being a victim to an owner of the situation. So instead of me saying, this has all been done to me, I was raised in a bad family and people treated me poorly, and that's why I drank, and so that's why I lied to people, and I'm just being the victim. Rather than when I can own the situation and say, you know what, I drank, and to hide my drinking, I lied to people. And there is taking ownership over the situation. Is it true that maybe there might be something in your past that might have led to your drinking? Sure, that could be true. It could be true that maybe you were raised in a dysfunctional home, or some traumatic event happened. That can be true. However, your actions to decide to drink or use or whatever, the action you took that affected other people, that was your choice, right? And how you responded to what was done to you. So, we want to be conscious of the fact that, yes, this did happen to you, but you and there can be healing that needs to happen there. but you're not a victim of the whole circumstance. It doesn't remove the fact that you need to take ownership over what you did, right? So sometimes I've found in working with people through the steps that there can be a very much like, well, so-and-so did this to me, and so-and-so did that to me, and there's really a lack of seeing their own part in it. So I just want to, something to reflect on if we are leaning towards that and we're failing to see our own side. I know I use this with my kids all the time, and I hope it sinks in and they can take it on into their adult lives. But I'm like, okay, so your brother hit you, but what's your part in it, right? So what did you do that he hit you? It's not good, right, that he hit you, but well, I called him a name. Okay, so that's your part. You called him a name, and he hit you. And I found almost every time they have an encounter of some bad behavior, it's because they both did something, right? And so I teach them, like, what's your part? And, do you need to make it right? And say you're sorry to your brother or whatever. And they give that, like, oh, I'm sorry. It's never a real good heartfelt, I'm sorry. But we hope that ours can be heartfelt. So it's important to really try to recognize in our interactions with people when things don't go very well, what's our part in it? And what can we take ownership over? And when we are stuck in that victim mentality, it's easy for us to justify our poor behavior, right? Like I was saying, like, this happened to me. I wasn't raised in church, or I wasn't raised, right, or my family drank, or this or that. Like, it's easy for us to justify it because of our situation. However, that is maintaining that victim mentality. It can become a delusion to us, and it isn't reality, and it's not a healthy way for us to approach our past situation. So hopefully, really the goal through steps 4 through 8 is for us to take those blinders off and recognize, through our inventory, what happened, what we did, what our part was, what our character defects were, leading us all the way up to this step that we're at now at step 9, which is beginning to get ready to take responsibility for these things and our part. So the first thing that we need to do is have good judgment. And what does that look like? Does anyone have any ideas of what good judgment should look like in making our amends? What should we do? What do you think, Brother Dejan? Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. Any other thoughts? Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So we need to, and we ask God by praying, right? And so we need to be prayerful. Sometimes we want God to, and especially I find this, for at least me, I would pray and they'd be like, okay, God, now, right? Give me an answer now. I'm waiting. Tell me it's the right time because I really want to do it right now. And so, but we can't manipulate God's timing, right? And we'll talk about that next. But to have good judgment, we need to lean on God. Like Brother Anthony said, we must be prayerful. And if we're not feeling like we're getting, guidance right away, then we need to wait. And that's all about timing. It's also important to check with, oh yes, Brother Kim. It's okay. Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That was the next piece, is to check with a sponsor, a pastor, a mentor, etc., whomever you're working with that can give you some guidance. And so that's why when you go through this step, I know with my sponsor, we walked through it together. And we kind of laid out the different amends and we categorized them. And then I shared with her what I was thinking about each. And then she gave me recommendations as to what she thought. Like, for example, the one with my parents, she suggested that I wait until I could go see them in person and do it in person. And I didn't like that answer because that meant I was going to have to wait. And it was like, that was a big one that I wanted to make as soon as I could. But ultimately, I ended up talking to them on the phone, and it went really well. But I waited for God's guidance on that. And he really, God prompted me one morning when I was leaving an AA meeting, actually, and the timing was right. And so I'm grateful that I waited, and grateful I didn't have to wait till I was going out there, because me going out there doesn't happen that often. So, but yes, absolutely. So I listened to my sponsor as much as I could, and then I told her how it went, and she was grateful for that it went well. And we need to think about, like I think Brother Dejan was mentioning, where we do it, when, how we do it. These things all need to be taken into consideration. And we can't, and again, we have to take our selfish lens off and our own convenience and our own wanting to hurry through it and think about the other person. When I made the amends with my kid's dad, with Brooklyn and Jamo's dad, I went to his house and did it at his convenience. And that was hard because they were still living in the house that we had lived in together. And I went and sat at his table with him, and I made that amends with him at a time that was good for him, right? And did I want to do it in that space? No, I probably would have preferred a neutral space or something like that. But it wasn't up to me in that moment. I needed to take responsibility for my actions and what I did. So it's important to consider all these things as you're looking and planning out these amends that you're going to make. God's timing, our careful timing in this is really important. So again, we don't want to delay it and drag our feet. That's a part of the timing as well, but we don't want to rush into it. So, and like I mentioned earlier, we want it to be behind us as quickly as possible, right? We want it to be done. We're embarrassed by what we did most of the time, right? It's embarrassing. There's shame still that may be hanging on, guilt that we feel, and none of those things are fun feelings that we want to continue to go through. So we want it to be behind us, but God's timing is so important. If we follow our own will and ambition, we're at risk of harming that other person even more than we did before. So if we rush through it and, I'll give an example of so when I was in my early 20s, my birth father found me, and he wanted to meet at a coffee shop. And I thought that he wanted to meet me because he'd never met me before. And it turns out when we met, he tells me that he is a recovering alcoholic and he wanted to make an amends with me. And I was offended because I'd never talked to him before. This is the first time we met. I didn't know he was an alcoholic. I was like 23. And now I look back and I was like, well, I respect that what he was trying to do, because I get it now. Thanks. You pass that on to me, brother. But I was really offended and I was hurt because it felt selfish to me. And so, especially something like that, like, honestly, like, I'm surprised that the guy decided that he was going to make me amends when he didn't even know me, right? I mean, sure, we're blood related, but I was a baby when, I was adopted. So it's like, it seemed selfish to me. At 23 years old, I could say that. And so, in my opinion, as the recipient of that amends, the timing wasn't right. Now, if he had decided to build a relationship with me and maybe talk to me on the phone a little bit here or there or whatnot, and then work his way towards it, I think I would have been more receptive. But he wanted to check the box and get it done. So he did, but it didn't work. So that's an example of a poorly timed amends. When we're following God's timing, we will find healing, restoration, and relief in the process. Things will work. It will be smooth. I'll use the example of my parents again. I tried to make an amends I tried to make an amends earlier I can't remember if it was when I'd done my step 9 or if I tried to rush it and do it before I'd actually done the step 9 with my sponsor. But I reached out and called my parents at one point, and I tried to make an amends with them. And the timing was not right. I wasn't ready. They weren't ready. It did not go well. It ended in tears and such. And I recognized that later that I was being selfish. And I don't remember what I said. I don't remember what happened exactly, but it just wasn't the right timing. And when it worked, I feel like I might have said the same things, but the timing was right. It was God's timing. And that's my one amends that I remember the most, that it was clearly God that directed me to do it when I did it. And when I followed God's timing on it, it worked. So I really encourage you, if you have a tough one like that in your life, that you really lean on God's timing of it. And don't give up. I mean, in this case, they're my family. I wanted to try again. I wanted to try and make that amends again. And so I did. God made that opportunity open for me. But, for someone like that, that's going to be a part of your life still, it's important to still wait on that timing and ask God about it. And be prayerful, sensitive to the timing of your amends. What's your motive? Again, are you just trying to sweep it off your plate? Are you trying to check the box? Are you trying to get it done as fast as you can? Or are you considering that person in this situation? Our responsibility requires intention. It requires thoughtfulness, wisdom, or it may make the situation worse, which we definitely don't need to add anything worse to our plates at this point. And we may avoid taking responsibility because we're afraid, or our pride is just too loud. We don't want to humble ourselves because it's not, it isn't a moment of great pride to come and make an amends with someone. You're really humbling yourself, right? And especially I've found, so think of it to where we all sit today. All of us, that are here, we're in church, right? Some of us have been here for a little bit. Some of us have some sobriety time. So if you're making an amends today to someone, it may be because you've made a new, I don't want to say mistake, but there's been an encounter where you need to own, like you need to take responsibility for the thing that you said, the thing that you did, right? And so that can be even harder at this stage. Now that it looks like everything's all together, it looks like, you're doing well and things are going right, but it's really important to not gather up more resentment, more baggage to carry along with you because you don't go back and make that situation right. You don't humble yourself enough. And it's the best thing that you can do, especially with your brothers and sisters, is to go back and make it right. And to let go, take that pride off for a moment and just own your part. And it helps to model that behavior as well. And it's hard. And again, this is kind of slipping into step 10 a little bit, but that's okay. That's all right. We'll let Jake worry about that next month. But sometimes it's really hard even just for me to say the words. So sometimes I will take the less than courageous route and send a text message, or I will write a card to someone or write a note. And not that those ways are wrong, but sometimes the best way is just to speak to the person directly. And I recognize in those moments for me, I was afraid. And I was afraid to, look that person in the eye and say, I was wrong. I did this wrong. And for me, most of you know me pretty well. Usually when that happens, I just start crying and, it's so my emotions. And so that's why I take these other routes. But find what works for you in trying to make things right with one another and set your pride aside. God wants us to remain humble. And so it's important that we don't just do this initially in our step work, but we continue to do this in our walk because it is not a one-time deal that we go through these steps and we do our step 9. It is a continual process through our life, or else we'll find ourselves at risk at relapse. There's no question about that if we can't continue to do this work. And think about how hard those that have, been here, done the work, how hard you've worked to be where you're at, or even just living for God, how hard you've worked to get closer to God, and then to allow things to come in and build resentment, bitterness, strife, right? When you can make it right. So I encourage you in that, that we need to let go of any pride we may have that might be holding us back, because we're not perfect. And that's why I have to, remind myself quite often. And then it's also not beating ourselves up because we did it too. That's what I struggle with a lot, is that I'm okay with the fact that I made a mistake, because I know I make quite often I make mistakes, but it's that then I beat myself up over it. And I've started to recognize that is a slippery slope for me. So I've got to be cautious about that, and I've got to let it go. But making that amends, making it right with someone else, helps me to let it go than hanging on to it. Okay. So we have to be courageous. We have to take that fear head on and just have courage. And when we're prayerful about this, God will give us the strength. He'll give us the courage to do it. Making amends with an ex, with parents, with someone that you might not have a very good relationship with can be really hard, because there's a fear of rejection. There's a fear that it may not go well. And we'll get to that in a few points about what happens then. But that fear can come in. God doesn't want us to have that fear. So lean on him to help you have courage to go out and do it. Now, it also says in the big book that we, there and in the 12 and 12, that there's some amends that may not be safe to make. If they're not safe for you, if they're not safe for the other person, then there's other ways you can do it. It may not be as safe to say face-to-face amends, right? There can be, you can write a letter, you can, so as long as you're not harming yourself or someone else in the process, then it's okay to go ahead and do. But if you feel like someone will be harmed, then there's got to be another path to it. And your sponsor, whoever you're working with, can walk you through that. But if it's something where it will not cause harm to that other person or you, then have courage to go forth, even though you're not sure what the outcome will be. When making the amends with my family, I didn't know, because the first time it didn't go very well. I didn't know what was going to happen. But all I knew is that God really was guiding me to do it right then and there, and to call them. So I did. And the words came out of my mouth. I don't know where they came from, and it worked. So I trusted on God in that situation. So I encourage you to do the same thing, to really lean on and get that courage from him directly. And then prudence. It's important for us to really think before we act or speak. And I think we can apply this to everything in our life, not just our amends process. It'll help us from having to make more amends. I know it's something I pray quite often, is that God will help me just to listen and just keep my mouth shut so that I can just really hear and not respond when I don't need to, but to know when I should be saying something. So just to really, and we say, it's said in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, but to have like a God pause. And so to stop and think. And so even if you're in that conversation with that other person, when you say to them, and we're not going to say, I'm sorry, and to grovel in front of them, but we're going to say, like, I know that I did this in my drinking. I know that I lied to you, that I took money from you, that I, whatever the case may be. And how can I make it right? How can we move forward and move past this? And in few words, right? And it may vary from that. But it's not necessarily just about going and making an apology, but it's making an amends. And so it might be pausing and listening to that person and what they have to say, right? And really, and they may say some things we don't want to hear. But it's really taking that in and listening and having humility. The last thing we want to do is really get in an argument in that moment in an amends process. So really think about listening and trying to just, if it's going in a place where you're noticing yourself where you might want to argue or it might get heated, then you might just want to just listen and walk away when the time is right. Because some amends, the other person, they aren't going to receive it. But remember that it is we're responsible for our own willingness and our own effort, but not for the outcome. So we're not responsible for them and how they feel. And that's also important in our recovery to recognize. We can't control other people. We can't control how they feel, how they think. All that we can do is own our own part, right? So we're responsible to go and make it right, but we can't make them accept it. We can't do anything about that, right? About the outcome. So there may be some times where it doesn't go well and you do have to walk away. But you can know that you took responsibility and you owned the situation and you did the best you could to make amends with that person. And again, like in my example that I gave, there may be a time where you come back to it and God opens the door for you to try it again with that person and it goes well. That could happen. You never know. But if not, it's important not to dwell on it as something that you can control, because you can't control that outcome. In the 12 and 12 on page 84, it says, although these reparations take innumerable forms, there are some general principles which we find guiding. Remorse is not sufficient. We have to take positive action. But it does not follow that we should make every conceivable restitution at once, nor should we assume that everyone we approach will cooperate with us. So it's about emotional and spiritual maturity to recognize that we can change and heal even though the other party may not be willing. It can be healing for us even just to go through the process, right? Even if they're not willing. So that's where the courage really comes into. We can't control others' responses, their feelings, or their actions, only our own. And we do have to be careful not to manipulate the situation to try and get the result that we want. We have to go to it with a pure heart, with prudence, being prayerful, seeking God's timing, and not trying to shape it into being something that we want, because then we're just being selfish, which for many of us is what got us there in the first place, was our selfish, prideful actions. So those are just some pieces that I encourage you to think about as you're making the amends process. I do have an activity to go through and then some reflection questions. And so what I'll do, since there's not very many of us here tonight, is that, Sam, if you can go ahead and pass out the clipboards. Dejan, would you mind doing the pens for us, brother? So what you'll find, really pay attention to, I designed this for other Saved and Sobers to use, so you can disregard the first part. But on there's a little chart, and it says the responsibility ladder. So it starts out with blame, it's someone else's fault, is the description. Then justify, I had no choice. Deflect, it's not that big of a deal. Recognize, I see my part in this, which is where we hope to be. Admit, I take ownership. Repair, I'm making it right. And then finally, grow, I've learned and changed. So I want you to reflect on these different stages, just individually, and write down examples that you might have from your own life when you might have been in that stage. When have you been in a blame stage? When have you deflected? If you don't have an example for one of the stages, that's okay. But I just encourage you to think through those examples. So we'll do that for a few minutes, and then we will just, as a large group, we will talk through the reflection questions. Any questions, or is it clear? Okay, thanks all.